Bye Maelstrom! Welcome back Fulmination. Oh, hello Chain Heal. Oh, you too, Healing Stream Totem and Shearing Totem. Wait, you have more friends? No! Okay! Thrall didn't cheat! Well, dear viewer, you will be happy to hear that Elemental is a pretty much new spec in Shadowlands, with a lot more promises to be properly adjusted, since right now there are a lot of things going for it, but not all work with each other in a synergistic way. But let's see what actually changed. First, the Shaman class has a few things baseline, regardless of specs. Chain Heal is here, giving some AoE healing utility for quite a bit of healing actually. Flame Tongue Weapon Imbue is also present to add to your weapon, and this adds fire damage to attacks, which right now seem to only be melee attacks, and it feels a little bit lackluster. Granted, you have a new ability called Primal Strike that uses your melee weapon to smash your target for a bit of damage. Also proccing Flame Tongue. It's actually just a tiny bit of damage, and although I see the fantasy of this, I cannot imagine a scenario where using it is better than casting a lightning bolt. There seems to be no real point to both of these abilities so far, unless the synergy can make them do something. Lightning Shield is also back in its primordial state of damaging melee attackers that strike you. Not very exciting, but hey, it's a Shaman specific thing, so glad it's baseline for LE too. Healing Stream and Shearing Totems are also back. Shearing doesn't seem to do much, and it's debatable if it can actually increase your DPS, although we could see legendary effects that play around with it. Healing Stream is not bad actually, it's not going to save anyone if shit hits the fan, but in a prolonged fight it can add a bit of healing, and between this and Chain Heal you can potentially relieve pressure from your healer or healers depending on the content that you do. These are pretty much the spells in the general Shaman page. Elemental at its core has been changed, Maelstrom has been scrapped, and Fulmination takes its place. Now, casting Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning will give you a 50% chance to generate one stack up to a total of 8. Casting Earthshock will consume the stacks and deal extra damage. Hence, Earthshock was changed to accommodate this and is the buff spender as opposed to a resource spender in BFA. The Fulmination damage event doesn't seem to be baked into the actual Earthshock damage, making the target be hit by essentially two spells at once, Earthshock and Fulmination, and this becomes important in a minute. With Earthshock in tow, Earthquake has also been changed. Once casted, deals AoE damage with a chance of knocking enemies down. The new effect baked into it comes from casting Chain Lightning, which it now grants a stack of Seismic Thunder on top of Fulmination, regardless of how many targets you hit. You do get extra stacks if it overloads though. Each stack reduces the cast time of your next Earthquake by 20%, capping at 5 clearly. This is neat and a nice synergy between Quake and Chain Lightning. Another baseline spell is Spirit Walker's Great. Oh my god, I'm so happy for this one, since it used to be a resto-specific ability. Granted, Elemental has a lot of instant spells that you can, build to or simply use to move, but with the increased number of priorities to keep up, this one seems to have come just in time. On Alpha, it doesn't seem to work with Stormkeeper, so hopefully this is just a bug. Right now there are only 2 Covenant abilities we can test in the outdoors, and sometimes they can work in dungeons. Regardless of how useful they will end up being, we can at least see how they complement the spec at this point. Vesper Totem is the Quirian ability, and it's pretty interesting to use. Pop it down and for 30 seconds it can be readjusted and replaced. When you cast a damaging spell, the totem emanates AoE damaging waves, and you can do this 3 times. You can also heal for 3 times and have it heal group members that are in range in an AoE fashion. So essentially you can get 3 AoE damage waves and 3 AoE healing waves with 1 totem with the current version of it. It seems really nice, and the fact that you don't have to choose between the two is actually better, since most of the time maximizing damage is going to be ideal, but if you can get 3 essentially free AoE heals on your group, why not? It helps out your group, helps out your healer, and in any case, gives your totem more versatility. Chain Harvest is the venthier one, and it's a mechanic we have seen a few times in the game. It jumps between targets, damaging up to 5 enemies and healing up to 5 friendlies, for a total of 10 targets affected. So far, each time it crits, it reduces its cooldown by 5 seconds for potentially up to 50 seconds cooldown reduced, giving it incredible uses when highly geared towards crit, which Elemental tends to favor more often than not anyway. This again plays into the fantasy of Shaman being a hybrid class with actually decent hybrid abilities that are not too strong to invalidate the healer role and not too weak where you feel you are wasting your time instead of killing your targets. So far, again, numbers could change in the live version. I was also able to check out the Fate Transfusion in the Torghast Tower. Its base functionality seems to look to accomplish the same thing as Chain Harvest. You channel it first to deal AoE damage in an area, and for its remaining duration you can unleash it and heal your allies around you. The numbers are okayish, but seems too similar to the other Covenant abilities in their functionality, with the added effect of hitting up to 8 targets as opposed to Chain Harvest's 5. Personally, I feel there are 3 issues as to why this could be inferior to Chain Harvest, at least in its design. First off, it's on a longer cooldown, and only its numbers could offset this, which is not yet clear. Second, the healing is based on the damaging number, which on paper is higher than Chain Harvest, but only 25% of it will be transformed into healing. So the fewer the targets, the smaller the heal, even if the individual targets will be hit by more. Lastly, it's a channeled skill that can be broken and its effect lost, as opposed to Chain Harvest, which you either cast it or don't, and if you have to interrupt it, the cast, that is, you don't put it on cooldown. Basically, fundamental spell channel issues. To be fair towards the ability, it could be the one you choose if you want more damage and less group utility, if everyone can be stacked and clearly seems to be oriented towards raiding, while Chain is aimed at dungeons based on the number of friendly targets it will affect. Primordial Wave is the Necrolord's Covenant ability and may be the only one that has any elemental interaction. When you fire this, it applies a flame shock on a target, and your next lava burst hits every target with a flame shock on them. This is actually the coolest elemental specific ability I have been able to play with, where you just fling meatballs all around, and it doesn't heal the party. It's clear it's meant for AoE, and depending on how the damage will scale, it might only be good for AoE, which is a bit of a bummer, but pretty much all Covenant abilities for Elemental have been aimed at AoE damage with no particular scaling for single target. Fundamentally, Elemental AoE seems to pose the most questions. Do you keep Flame Shock up on multiple targets? Is it better than casting Chain Lightning for more earthquakes? Do you also consume fulmination stacks generated by Chain Lightning with Earth Shock in AoE? Add on top of this all the other AoE Covenant abilities, and at one point you might go, wait, what? This doesn't make any sense. Because Fulmination replaced Maelstrom, a bunch of talents have been adapted to the new system, but realistically serve the same purpose with a similar functionality. Elemental Blast on the first row no longer overloads but consumes Fulmination stacks. This actually changes things a bit on first glance, because talenting it could replace Earth Shock altogether outside of situations where you need to move. I am really curious to know how this sims and fits in the rotation priority-wise, but I'll leave that for the big brains in the Elemental community. On the second row, we have a new talent called Echoing Shock. It's an instant cast with a 30 seconds cooldown that hits pretty hard, to be honest. It adds an extra effect that will duplicate your next spell cast after a second. Now, the limits to this one I still haven't been able to test fully. I know for sure it does not duplicate the fulmination damage if you use Earth Shock after it, and it's hard to tell if it duplicates an empowered Stormkeeper Lightning Bolt or Chain Lightning. If you cast it with Elemental Blast, you actually get 2 buff procs from the spell, so that's really cool actually. My only conclusion so far seems to point out that Echoing Shock casts the base version of the spell you are casting right after it. Seems a few things don't really work as they seem to be intended to. I'm not sure what the final iteration of this will be, but depending on how unhinged the devs are on this project, it could be a very interesting mechanic to play with. Definitely interesting in the current entry. Aftershock was adapted to include fulmination in its potential refund mechanic. That and Seismic Thunder for Chain Lightning, and if you take Elemental Blast, you then have 3 spells that have a 25% chance to not consume their respective stacked buffs. Taking this felt a bit overwhelming at first, where I had Lava Surge procs, Fulmination stacked to max, then when entered in the AoE, Seismic Thunder as well. Although getting used to the spec takes time, it was a bit weird to have to use Earthquake to not waste Seismic charges, then an Earthshock to consume Fulmination that were generated by Chain Lightning, and in between pop Lava Bursts on the priority target. It was a lot to do. It felt like I never had a dull moment, but also I was asking myself, wait, why do I need to press Earthshock in AoE? And do I keep Flame Shocks on multiple targets instead of Chain Lightning to Earthquake after? Totem Mastery has the Resonance Totem that will generate Fulmination stacks instead of Maelstrom. Nothing else changed so far, except the potential bug where Surge of Power seems to be active even though I did not pick it. So far, Elemental has received some of the most changes in terms of numbers, but feels a bit unfinished. All of the systems and procs and buffs it has going on are fun to play with, but there isn't a strong synergy between them to give the spec a proper flow. The devs promise some more changes from what I understand, and hopefully the spec can function and be good without being propped up by band-aid systems like legendaries and soulbinds. Certain baseline abilities also seem to have no purpose, which brings us to the unpruning. On one hand, these abilities, like Shearing Totem, have been taken out of the game since they were underused or had no proper interaction with the spec. We asked for more Shaman class fantasy to be brought back, and the devs definitely answered. On the other hand, I feel like after 15 years, making more spells matter and have some form of interaction with the spec shouldn't be an impossible thing. I get it, there are a lot of specs to be taken care of, but really, isn't that just part of game design? The current design intent, as it is apparent, seems to put the player in a position where you want to choose between casting X or Y, but X builds to a different outcome from Y, so it feels awkward to choose. It feels a bit all over the place, and a few things make no sense without some proper dev notes. Why doesn't Shearing Totem do anything? Why is Flame Tongue useless, and why doesn't Primal Strike interact with anything at all? Can it generate a one guaranteed stack of Fulmination and Seismic Thunder with a potential cooldown so you are not incentivized to spam it? Or maybe have it apply Frost Shock instantly, giving it the utility of, hey, this mob came in melee and I want to kite it so I can safely cast. Since Shearing Totem has a cooldown, maybe make it have a 50% chance to extend Flame Shock duration by 1 second. Maybe make Earthquake consume Fulmination stacks also and spread that damage between all the targets it hits. That way you don't feel like you need to consume Lava Surge, Seismic Slam and Fulmination stacks all at the same time, giving you too many instances of choosing this over that. Or make Chain Lightning not generate Fulmination, but make Seismic Thunder have a Fulmination-like effect baked into it to not make you want to use Earth Shocks in AoE. And these issues are even more pronounced with the Aftershock talent, I think. This is the current feeling I have of Elemental. Don't get me wrong, I had fun playing it, but I can see these issues becoming a problem once we get the Raid, Mythic Plus and such, and it will never feel good to play a spec that looks and feels incomplete. Similar to Enhancement, if all of these can be polished and make the talents, passives, new spells, all interact with the core spec in some way, be it even a minor way, the spec will have tremendous potential. Until then, I recommend you guys keep your eyes peeled on the Earth Shrine Discord community, where the top brains will continue to feedback and theorycraft the spec as Shadowlands is approaching. Thank you very much to our patrons for supporting our channel and being a part of our awesome community that you, dear viewer, are also a part of indirectly by watching this video. Isn't that how it works? But if you're also interested in supporting us a little bit more, the Patreon link is down below the video and you can check it out and see what goodies you have in store. We have in store for you. Thank you for watching the video. See you next time.